and welcome to episode 1, or part 1, if you will, of 5 underrated PS2 games. This is not a top 5 list, and just to clarify what I mean by underrated, I mean these are games that the general gaming public saw little value in at the time of their release, despite any pre-release coverage, good review scores, and etc. They either came out under the radar or quickly slipped under the radar not long after their release. I know the now common term is hidden gem, but I've been posting them as underrated gems for 8 years now, and so I see little reason to change the wording despite the many debates I've had in the comment sections of my old videos. Thanks to YouTube, you may disagree that some of these are still under the radar, as YouTube has opened up the door for better coverage of these games. And I'd like to think that even some of my old videos have brought some attention to them. And with that being said, let's get to part 1 or episode 1 or whatever I'm supposed to call it of 5 underrated PS2 games. Aggressive Inline. Post Tony Hawk's Pro Skater's 1999 release, the extreme sports genre became one of the hottest genres around. In fact, it seemed like every extreme sport under the sun now needed its own video game. We had surfing games, razor scooter games, snowboarding games, skiing games, and most of them weren't up to the standards set by Neversoft's S.L.A.I. However, if there was one developer that not only released games, in my humble opinion, that not only were on par with Neversoft's releases, but in some ways even bested them, it was developer Z-Axis, known best for the Dave Mirra Freestyle BMX series, but also releasing Thrasher Skate and Destroy, which did horribly in the review scores, but is appreciated by many real skaters as being the most true to skating. And this game, which is actually one of the best extreme sports games released on the PS2, GameCube, and Xbox. Inline doesn't seem to have the same trick modifier system Z-Axis used for Dave Mirra, but it does have some new moves that can only be done on inline skates, like the ability to skate backwards, vault over objects, or even swinging around light poles. The levels are large, and Z-Axis did away with, up to that point, the traditional timers used in extreme sports games. As you play and complete different objectives, you unlock new areas in each level, new levels, and even gain attribute points for your skater through earned experience. The level designs are reminiscent of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4, where you skate around looking for characters in each level to add challenges for you to complete. The only thing is, this game actually beat Tony Hawk 4 to the market by about 5 months. But since most gamers are more familiar with Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 than this game, I use it as a reference. There is even a park editor mode added for good measure, which we first saw in Street Skater 2 actually, not Tony Hawk 2. The graphics are still decent, considering this is a 2002 release for the PS2. But Z-Axis's games were usually slightly a little rougher around the edges than Neversoft's were. A bit more glitchier, the camera and controls can be kind of twitchy at times, and the mechanic where you only hold the jump button slightly before you go off a ramp instead of holding it the whole time might throw Tony Hawk veterans off. The soundtrack consists of bands like Sublime, POD, Hoobastank, and more. However, the Xbox version of the game allows you to use custom soundtracks of songs ripped to your hard drive. So if you want to play the game using your own music, that might actually be the best version of the game to get. Even if you got completely Tony Hawked out and haven't played this genre in years and have absolutely no interest in professional inline skating, this game is still a whole lot of fun to play and may even bring you back to the genre if you've long left it. Z-Axis made the best Tony Hawk alternatives, and this game is possibly their best work. Let's forget about BMX XXX, which was crappy even with the TNA scenes. And it's also one of the best extreme sports games of that whole generation of gaming. It is no wonder why Activision eventually acquired Z-Axis themselves, but then EA'd them. Bombastic. PS1 gamers might be familiar with Devil Dice, which was a devilishly addictive puzzle slash insane multiplayer game that allowed up to 5 players to play against each other. I covered Devil Dice in part 3 of my 5 PS1 games worth playing video series. Bombastic is the by far lesser known PS2 sequel to Devil Dice. Bombastic combines the gameplay of the original Devil Dice with, I would say, Bomberman actually, in that the dice no longer just disappear from the screen when lined up with the same number of dice as the number on the face of the die. For example, lining up 6 dice with 6 face up. This now causes the dice to count down and eventually explode, hence the name Bombastic. Whereas Devil Dice's single-player mode saw gamers completing developer-designed, sometimes brain-teasing puzzles, Bombastic has replaced the puzzle mode with an actual quest mode. The quest mode tells the story of how 5 little cutesy devils want to go visit the grandfather they never knew, and sees them traversing and clearing isometric levels of enemies from a start point to a finish point. These levels can be just as challenging and brain-teasing as the puzzle mode in the original Devil Dice. The quest mode is really well thought out, but like Devil Dice, the real appeal that will keep you coming back for more are the Endless Trial and multiplayer modes. The Endless Trial is a relaxing yet incredibly addictive experience and a great alternative to the high-strung action of the multiplayer modes. The multiplayer modes allow up to 5 players with a multi-tap and are pure mayhem and fun. However, as in Devil Dice, you'll want to play this game against human opponents, as the computer AI opponents are completely cutthroat at this game and usually just mop the floor with you. If you aren't a fan of the new exploding dice addition to Bombastic, it doesn't take very long to unlock Classic Mode in order to enjoy the multiplayer mayhem with the mechanics of the original Devil Dice. If you were a big fan of Devil Dice but never knew about Bombastic, this is a must-buy, and it's actually cheaper to pick up than the original. If you never knew about Devil Dice but are looking for some addictive puzzle action and the best multiplayer experience on the PS2 you've never played, this is definitely worth looking into as well. Kinetica. Imagine taking the God of War engine and making it into a futuristic racing game in similar vein to Wipeout. No, strike that. Imagine that before God of War ever existed, Sony Santa Monica Studios released a futuristic racer in similar vein to Wipeout on the engine that would eventually become the God of War engine. Well, you don't have to imagine because it exists, and it's called Kinetica. Kinetica forgoes the typical futuristic vehicle driving elements of the genre by having you control human characters who are wearing kinetic suits. Essentially, the characters become the vehicle. As in SSX, you gain boost by performing tricks. The tricks are done by holding the R1 button and putting in movements on the same analog stick you use to steer. This takes away your ability to steer while you are doing tricks, so a lot of the strategy and risk involved is choosing the right time to perform tricks in order to get much needed boost, versus having to steer your character around the course. Straightaways and the many jumps in the game are the ideal time to perform tricks, but you will find yourself trying them at more riskier places, seeing if you can get 1 or 2 tricks off before a sharp turn for an extra little boost. This becomes a very engaging part of the gameplay. Sometimes 1 extra second of boost is the difference between a last second upset into first place and taking second or third place in the race. The tracks themselves are really well designed and have a ton of shortcuts and branching routes for you to find. The tracks also have nice variety to them, as you won't just be racing in futuristic cityscapes, but also organic looking environments like the Lost City level. Collecting 5 yellow crystals or 1 purple crystal gives the player a special ability like the burst attack, faster tricks, infinite boost, and etc. but for the most part, any combat elements take a backseat to the tricks to earn boost and the racing itself. Graphically, the game moves lightning fast, and the tracks support a fair amount of detail with some nice lighting and water effects. However, this looks better than a lot of games released for the PS2 in 2001, but you can tell this is second gen graphical tech. Yes, the engine would later go on to run the, by PS2 standards, graphical powerhouses known as God of War, but that would be almost 4 years later and a lot of no doubt tweaking. However, speed was by far the most important thing to get right, and they smashed it out of the park. The controls feel responsive most of the time. Not being able to steer and do tricks at the same time does take some getting used to, and players can even use the right analog stick as the accelerator if they don't want to use the face buttons. The only hiccup I have with the controls is that sometimes the trick system doesn't feel very responsive. You'll be holding the R1 button and moving that analog stick in every which direction you can think of, sometimes to no response from your character, or a limited or delayed response. However, it doesn't always happen, and it's probably operator error. The music is the traditional electronic style first seen in games like Wipeout, and I actually really enjoy the tunes in this game. Overall, this is a really good futuristic racer for the PS2, but also a really challenging one. You only have 3 continues per race season, so failing to finish in at least third place 3 times in a row means you have to start back over from the beginning of the entire season. I've never actually beaten this game in full, but partially because an old save that I had got deleted when a massive memory card I had bricked out on me. Overall, this is easily one of the best games of this type on the PS2 and one of the best offerings in the futuristic racing genre of its entire generation. F-Zero GX might be the champ, but Kinetic is still a great pickup if you're a fan of these kinds of games. The Mark of Cree. The Mark of Cree actually got a fair amount of coverage prior to its release, and it seems to have gotten a lot more attention in recent years thanks to YouTube. Even my original underrated gem video for this game I posted 8 years ago has garnered over 65,000 views as of making this video. And it has been re-released on the PlayStation Store as well. But in case you happen to have missed it, the Mark of Cree has been aptly described as Disney meets Conan the Barbarian. Its art style is reminiscent of animated Disney films, but the extremely gory elements of the game give it its muchly deserved mature rating. Cree's gameplay is a mixture of action and stealth. The levels are linear in nature, but allow the gamer to decide if they want to stealthily kill as many opponents as possible, or rush in for a much harder experience of constant fighting. Again, stealth isn't required in the game, but it's preferred if you want to make it to the end of the level. And these stealth kills are pretty awesome to watch as well. Helping Rao along the way is his trusty spirit guide Kuzo, a magical and ancient bird who also narrates the really cool hand-drawn story elements in the game, and who allows players to scout ahead in the game by landing on perch icons located in selected spots in each level. Kuzo will also occasionally hit a switch or grab an item, or even knock down a ladder for Rao to progress. Inevitably, however, you will be seen or forced into a big battle against multiple foes, and that's where Kree's unique combat system comes into play. The combat system sees Rao locking onto multiple opponents by using the right analog stick, and then having each of those enemies being assigned to square, X, or circle buttons on the controller. Pressing the buttons will then see Rao attack the enemy who has been assigned that button in the game. It was a unique attempt to innovate combat and allow gamers to take on multiple enemies at one time. However, more fluid and twitch fighting systems like those in Devil May Cry and God of War would eventually become the mainstream standard, leaving Kree's fighting system uniquely its own experience. The only other game that has ever emulated it being the I'm sorry, European gamers, this never got released overseas sequel, Rise of the Kasai. Rao's arsenal grows beyond his trusty broadsword as the game progresses to include a bow and arrow for long-range stealth kills on all non-armored enemies, and a spear that can target up to 2 enemies at once, and even a beastly axe that can target up to 3 enemies at once and even sever them midsection. That's really cool, by the way. He even has an unarmed disarm move that even Altair would tip his hood to that is incredibly useful in taking down the heavily armored enemies in the game in one hit. The overall combat is still really fun in its own right, if not a little limited when compared to combat in games like God of War, but it still sets Cree apart from other games. The graphics have actually aged well due to the cartoon style art direction in the game, and the controls are responsive, with the only issue that pops up most of the time being the design choice to have Rao's sword ricochet off of walls and other solid objects, which can hamper fighting in cramped spaces. The music is good and the voice acting in the game is excellent. The Mark of Cree is a game I paid $50 for brand new right after it released, and I have never regretted my purchase. Cree has a very unique mixture of storytelling, stealth, and action gameplay with its own fighting mechanics that set it apart, all bundled together in a cool animated style world. I highly recommend this game to all PS2 gamers or to anyone with access to the PlayStation Store. I've heard some people call it a classic. I just say it's a great game. S.L.A.I. S.L.A.I? S.L.A.I? Steel Lancer Arena International. I'm actually not sure how you're supposed to pronounce this game, so before the pronunciation Nazis come in and tell me that I am pronouncing the game wrong, I don't know. I don't know what to say. Steel Lancer and Crimson C2 have one thing in common. They are both PS2 exclusive sequels to exclusive games on the original Xbox. This game is the little-known sequel to the little-known Xbox game named Phantom Crash, not to be confused with the little-known Xbox game named Phantom Dust. I have a video of this game up on YouTube dating back to November 2007, which is 1 month or so after I started YouTube altogether. This is possibly my favorite mech game on the PS2, which is saying a lot because I love the Armored Core series and Steambot Chronicles. So what happens when you take the deep customization options of a game like Armored Core and put them into a simulated online world with simulated online deathmatches on simulated servers? You get the incredibly addictive formula that makes up Steel Lancer. This game makes you fight and struggle your way up the ladder on your way to being the highest ranked SV pilot in the world. Players start out by buying a basic model SV from one of the 5 SV makers and slowly try to climb their way up the ladder by earning cash for destroying as many opponents as they can in the arenas. Your payouts are based on your performance. Like Armored Core, this game is very hard to get ahead in. Even with your best kill streaks in the arena, the steep cost of upgrading your SV and the steep cost of just about everything else in the game makes getting ahead a very tough task. This game can actually be infuriatingly cheap at times, and you will be saving after everything you do and reloading your data a lot. I actually suggest using 2 of the save slots, if not all 3 of them, in order to not lose data in case you save yourself into a corner. Death can come very swiftly in the battles if you're not careful. Luckily, if you know where to look in each arena, dropships sometimes leave much needed life and ammo pickups. However, the best advice I can give you at first is to find a good camping spot to shoot your opponents from a distance, and where you can see when the items get dropped off. Cheap tactic in real online games, but one that works well against AI opponents in this game. The battles themselves are very intense, and you will often find yourself saying, just one more kill, one more before I leave. You have to balance risk versus reward. If you manage to survive long enough in each battle, you are eventually greeted with a cutscene of that class's ranker coming up the lift. Should you manage to defeat them in battle, you then become the new number 1 ranker on that class. If you get tired of playing the same arena, or become the number 1 ranker in all the classes of that entire server, you can move on to the next server and try your luck there. Overall, between the intense battles, the deep customization options with a million different possible combinations, stylish simulated online world, and tough as nails gameplay, this game will steal hours from you. According to the box, there is 50 hours of gameplay in this game, but with the constant reloading of data, I would say there is a lot more. I've never beaten this game because, like Kinetica, I completely lost my save data for the game when that stupid massive memory card died on me, completely putting off my will to start all over again on hold for almost 10 years. However, I've played enough of the game to thoroughly recommend it. At one time, Konami even had real online servers up for this game for up to 4 players. But even when I bought this game less than 2 years after its release, the servers had long since been taken down. There is still a 2-player split screen battle option though.